Wednesday, October the 13th. First item of business will be public comment. Seeing no public comment, I'm going to talk about the approval of the minutes for September the 29th.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or revisions or additions?
Madam Chair?
Yes. Mr. Suding.
On page 4, item number 1, under the motion, comment 1, page 32, third bullet below 10.2.1, as well as other locations in the report, should be revised to read, quote, the Bush, B-U-S-H, hammered concrete, end quote. Page 6, item number 3, under the motion 2C, the planting in the parkway should be more broken up. 2E, provide a sample of the Bellegarde pavers. Concrete pavers are generally not acceptable. Motion number 3, scratch the last part of the sentence beginning with and. So the new motion should read, color selection of the awnings on the west and south and perhaps the east elevations should be researched for their traditional aspect. Page 9, item 6, under the motion 1D as in David, it's 500 watts, not kilowatts. Got it? That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or revisions or additions? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve as revised?
I think you should say all in favor because we already voted on it.
Oh, that's right. We already have the motion, or amend the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
2 abstentions. Adams and Boucher. All right. Next item of business will be the consent calendar.
Yes, Madam Chair, we are reviewing the HLC consent calendar. Item A, 10 East Carrillo Street was final approval as submitted. Item B, 6 West De La Guerra Street was final approval as noted. Item C, 710 Anacapa Street was final approval as noted. And item D, 1900 La Swain was final approval as noted. Those were reviewed by Commissioner Schallenberger, and item C was reviewed by Commissioners Schallenberger and Suding, and item D was reviewed by Commissioners Drury, Schallenberger, and Suding.
Thank you. May I have a motion to ratify that calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That motion carries. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes of the signed committee consent meeting of September 29th.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, those were reviewed by Louise Boucher and Natalie Cope this morning, and there were no changes.
All right. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstain? That motion carries. Next item of business is announcements.
So, Madam Chair, Commissioners Sharp, Murray, and Boucher will be absent from today's meeting. And items 1 and 2 on today's agenda at 318 State Street and 1303 State Street, respectively, have been postponed 2 weeks at the applicant's request. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any other?
Chair,
Yes.
I have to leave by 5:30.
I think we'll make it. Thank you.
We could find something for you to do.
I need to leave at 3.
Madam Chair, I do have a quick update I'd like to inform the Commission on. Yesterday, we were...
The staff presented some ordinance amendments.
Yeah.
I believe I sent a package of information last week to the Commission to give you some background on the proposal, and I wanted to just keep you up to date on the discussions that were held and where we're heading with
The changes. There were 5 primary changes that we're initiating, and they were being forwarded primarily to try to deal with our budget cutbacks and staffing level reductions. And you all are aware that we've changed the sign committee staffing and reconstituted them in more of a consent calendar review. So we're actually trying to get that formally move forward to the city council so they can confirm that what we're doing is appropriate. But we also we're dealing with sign enforcement issues related to a lot of the types of lighting installations that are being displayed throughout the city, primarily with the idea of drawing attention to businesses. And we feel that that type of installation is inconsistent with the purpose of our sign ordinance. And we also have some additional technologies that have been created over the years that allow for a lot of creative installations to come forward, including the projection of lit signs on building facades at night, which tends to draw a lot of attention. So we were there primarily to clarify these things. Unfortunately, that we did have some objections to some of the changes that we were proposing for real estate signs. The realtors came out in force and said that they would want to have more open house signs. Right now, you're allowed to have 3 off-site open house signs, the little signs that they place out. There was a request anywhere from 5 to 7 that they wanted. So we didn't want to do that, but there seems to be a need to have that discussion. But what I wanted to primarily just to let you be aware of is that there was a proposal to deal with monitors or LED screens. We've dealt with the innovations of how these television screen monitors have been so reduced in size, and you can place them anywhere essentially. And what we're seeing them is to be placed in gasoline pumps, and we have we believe a need to clarify our ordinance to say those are signs. They do move, glare, and change copy, and we think that they do propose off-site advertising of businesses, and that some of them actually have audio. And there seems to be some level of support because they also have a public benefit. They're also connected to the emergency systems and have public service messages. So these public service agencies came before and said how valuable they were. So I just want to let the Commission know that we did have Louise Boucher briefly speak on the matter, that if you really would like to comment or send a recommendation forward, you could do so either formally through the chair or either have some discussion items to carry that forward to the ordinance committee and eventually the council. So I want to make sure that you're aware of those types of discussions. And the other 2 issues I will be discussing today, and they did forward them to council for adoption, and they primarily deal with the time approval extensions, and I'll explain to you what we're proposing to change on that today, and that'll be part of your guidelines also, and the idea of preliminary approvals changing to project design approvals. So those are 2 changes I'm going to be discussing with today's presentation.
Thank you. Is there any discussion about this item? Yes.
Yeah, I wonder how we can send a message regarding those monitors, especially the sound. It just seems trivial, but I've been. My office is downtown State. I mean, on the 700 block of State Street, and I'm very aware of what happens with sound and music and so forth. And I know in one place where they have it was a big deal 15 years ago. And it's a very impacts. It can create some impacts, and if you reproduce that, and it could really get out of hand really fast. Mm-hmm. And this idea of the public service and it's always the same. It's not a just justifiable excuse. We may have an earthquake every 10 years or a flood every 5 or something like that. But these things would be going on 24/7 if we let them proliferate. So I suggest that we send a word of caution to council through this commission. That's what I would like to do. Regarding the, well, the monitor is one thing, but the sound is even worse.
Yes. Does anybody else like to discuss this item, or would we like to send a word to the council?
Well, I agree. I think that we don't want it to get out of hand, and the sound is the biggest impact. So I think that we should be careful as a city moving forward with allowing a bunch of sound 24/7 on these LEDs.
Is this something you want in the form of a motion or a statement?
Well,
or?
Madam Chair, the item is not on for discussion technically. I wanted you to keep, it's more of an update. However, it's that you could direct staff to prepare a memo for the chair's signature to convey these sentiments. And so right now, if you can capture what you believe the sentiments of the commission are, we could certainly formulate that so I can present that to the ordinance committee for their consideration.
Mr. Peugeot, would you like to formulate that, the sentiments?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
if I
and
just
Mr.
could
Suning?
add one small comment. With respect to public benefit and emergency broadcasting, sounds like somebody found a loophole to me. But there are other ways to have emergency broadcast happen. UCSB, for one, has implemented something that is dormant until needed. And I don't see why that isn't
Right.
doable.
I agree. Mr. Peugeot?
I would say that the message should be that the Historic Landmarks Commission is concerned about the proliferation of LCD monitors as a form of advertisement, and very concerned about the use of sound coming out of these monitors. Second point, the Commission believes that the public safety argument is not strong enough to warranty to allow this type of intrusion into the historic feeling of the city.
Madam Chair,
If everyone agrees with that, what I could do is take this as direction from the commission for staff to follow up and make that clear to the ordinance committee that these are your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. I'll sign something, or however we want the whole commission to sign. It doesn't matter. I think we're all in agreement.
I would also just add a touch to what that concern is that these sounds from these devices will be occurring all night long, and that could be a form of noise pollution, especially sensitive at night.
Apparently, just
did a little bit more research on these. You do have a button that could be turned off, but again, you have to sort of look for it.
Yeah.
It automatically generates the noise, and you could actually mute it if you don't. Yes. You can step forward and speak on the issue. Sure.
All right, Mr. Forrest. Thank you. Step forward.
Two questions. Is the proposed ordinances available online?
That's correct. We can give you a copy today, too, also, Mr. DeForest, if you'd like a copy.
Okay. And secondly, is there any place that one can see, have they installed these anywhere in the area that so we could see how blatant they are?
We actually have a location. It's at the corner of Chapala and Carrillo. Unfortunately, it's our understanding that they installed them without approval. And our position is that we consider that an exterior change in the Pueblo Viejo district that needs city review.
So Chapala and
Carrillo, the
Chapala
Shell station,
That's
gas
right.
The
station.
gas station, you can really hear it
Yes.
everywhere in that parking lot.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
And is it all lit up too? Does it light up?
It's a little
Does it-
screen. Yeah. Yeah, it's a
It's a
television.
little monitor.
Sound in the middle of the day, even with a lot of traffic.
Want to speak on the sign? Would you step forward, help him himself?
There's also a Shell station that I stop at. Oh, Michael Selfick, thank you. There's a Shell station in Glendale that I stop at, and you're pumping gas, and then all of a sudden this blare comes at you. And it is very audible, so you hear all these voices coming from the pumps. When we had Long's here in town, they had help you out station, but as you walk by, again, it started talking to you, and it was quite a startle.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Schellenberger.
So, from the perspective of the commission, it certainly does not have a historical feel to it at all. But philosophically, I agree with Mr. Peugeot. I mean, we're all going to be walking around in helmets and shoulder pads at some point, being protected. I mean, all this, and then you look like the bad guy when you argue against safety. So please craft this memo and pass it along to City Council.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we'll be unanimous on this. Thank you.
Councilman Saab, did you have some other discussion item that you want to address the commission?
I brought you some
Yes.
documents. It's the Chapala Street Guidelines. Again, my name is Michael Self, Councilmember Michael Self. And if you notice, these were adopted in December of 2004. And just from a little historical context about that, this was the time when the traffic calming was becoming more popular in the city, and it was thought that it was going to cure a lot of ills. And so that timing is, I think, important. And I've highlighted two sections for you. One is on page 13, second column top. It says, curb and sidewalk bulb out shall be added at all intersections. That is stated in the guidelines. However, if we flip back to page 7, and I've highlighted this for you, it states guidelines can form a basis for the denial of a project. Non-compliance with these guidelines shall not be grounds to invalidate any action taken by the HLC, PC, and so on. So you are given the authority to deny it. And if you notice in the second pamphlet, and this was something that someone contacted me about, was that you weren't seeing the whole picture because the latest approval of bulb out, the sketch is to have all four corners have bulb outs. And so they just felt that you should have seen the big picture, not the little picture, and that you are not required by these guidelines to go through with this. So I would like you to consider really the historic nature of a bulb out and whether that fits well into our streetscape. My understanding is that a 6-foot bulb out saves 1 second of walking time. And we've been looking for information, and if anybody has it, how these really do add to safety, I'd appreciate knowing that. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Madam Chair, I would like to comment on it because
Yeah.
I was around when these guidelines were
Yeah.
created. And for the benefit of myself, we did place some language in the guidelines to make it very clear that it was the decision of the Historic Landmarks Commission as to whether the bulb outs needed to be complied with or any element of the guidelines.
Right.
And so this language does give flexibility
Right.
that this commission can decide when they are appropriate and when they are not. And a lot has to do with whether or not the project scope merits this type of improvement. And I know as we move forward, the idea that these would be an incremental improvement was discussed internally, and as part of this appeal that's coming forward at council at the 101 West Cañon Perdido, we will have a discussion with council as to whether we need to revisit these guidelines and or talk about whether they should be done in an incremental fashion, because the project at 101 West Cañon Perdido only offers one corner, and that seems to be not the type of improvement that we would like to see. We'd like to have them done in pairs, hopefully, so one can cross from one side of the street to the other. And so there'll be more discussion, I think, in the future about the guidelines themselves.
I would suggest a little field trip by the group to go where the existing guidelines are and find out when the buses are making those turns and the delivery trucks coming, and witness the community benefit of bulb outs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Schellenberger?
I'd like to thank you for bringing this to us. I didn't realize that the language used the word shall. Curb and sidewalk bulb out shall be added at all intersections. And I'm just wondering the legality of that under the heading of a guideline. That's not a guideline. That's more like an ordinance language. And I'm not sure that guidelines don't use the word shall. It's should or may, these types of things. And
Madam
I'm just-
Chair, that was purposeful. There was a strong
But that-
message. Again, that you may have a different interpretation of what you'd like to see in the guidelines, but until council directs us to change them, they are speaking based on, there was no mistake about that. There was a clear direction to implement our pedestrian master plan and elements, and although Councilmember herself may disagree with that, she has the ability to ask for those to be changed, and that would come forward back for discussion, and we could have that discussion.
I understand. I understand. I just mean, how is that enforced? You know, how would an applicant, for example, I mean, it's
if
not
I
an
may,
ordinance.
there are other types of implementation measures that are required. For example, the 101 West Cañon Perdido is a project that goes to the Planning Commission, and they may require this type of compliance. And you may step into that discussion and say you disagree and recommend that it not be a requirement. But that language was purposeful, and I think there is some concerns among council members that it should not be that ingrained into every project, and that's certainly part of as you see any project that comes forward, you always have the ability to make that decision. So I just wanted to let you know that was not a mistake.
No,
Thank
it
you.
wasn't. And I agree with you. I have talked about the time when you're going to go out your door and you'll have to go through the bubble pack machine and the helmet installation before you can leave your home and be certified ready to leave.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Suning.
I was on the commission when these guidelines were crafted, and I do remember having discussion about shall and should and may. That put aside, I personally try to look at these bulb out installations on a case-by-case basis, and that, to say that they should be added at all they shall be added at all intersections, I don't necessarily agree with, and I probably voiced myself at the time these were crafted. So I will continue to look at them on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes I do think they are beneficial for public safety, particularly when you're crossing a 4-lane plus parking type roadway in a situation where the road is narrower, like Anacapa Street or Santa Barbara Street. I don't think they're always necessary, and it also has to do with the pedestrian load on a particular intersection. Some intersections are used more than others, so I will continue to look at it on a case-by-case basis because I do think that sometimes they are beneficial.
I wonder if it wouldn't be helpful if the language were changed at some point that they shall be considered for every intersection. Simply that they shall be considered for every intersection, but not required.
On a case-by-case.
Madam Chair, again, you have an
I
opportunity
know.
to go forward on that appeal. Well, we're going to request a commissioner to attend that hearing. I think it's November 16th. And you could convey your concerns about the language and how you feel that it should be interpreted.
It's a 6 o'clock meeting.
Well,
Bring a sandwich.
Ms. Gantz has informed me
We haven't selected a commissioner for that date, so that might be something we could
either decide today or some other day.
Well, thank you for your time, and again, I know you're overwhelmed with reams of guidelines for everything we have, and I appreciate your service. Thank you.
Thank you. If someone wishes to volunteer for the 16th, not all of us carry our calendars around with us. Mr. Peugeot, please do. Thank you.
Maybe I would like to, I was part of the group that drafted those guidelines. I think the I think I would like the commission to visit the installed curb extensions on West Ortega, West Anapamu, and familiarize with what they do and what they don't do. I would like to represent the commission. I was a member at that time. I do support, in general, curb extensions. If you want to have somebody who does not support curb extensions to speak as well, we can do that.
Is there anybody who wishes another opinion to be expressed given Mr. Peugeot's expressions?
I mean, I'm on the fence. I think it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and so that's not really saying that I'm in favor or against them. And it just needs to be looked at a case-by-case basis.
And you
So
represent my opinion in that sense.
I may not be the best person to balance out Commissioner Peugeot. I don't know.
Yes?
Madam Chair?
Yes?
Well, we had 3 commissioners absent from that hearing, Naylor, Peugeot, and Sharp. So Commissioner Peugeot was absent from that. Commissioner Suding was opposed. So the remaining were on the prevailing side, so it might be good to have one from each side.
Does it state why I was opposed? I don't believe it was because of the bulb out. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, because in that location I felt that a
Mr.
bulb out was
Suding,
beneficial.
I think you were focused on the material.
I was.
Material on the building.
Yeah.
So I think you could speak on it.
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I spoke at the City Council for
That's correct.
the appeal for, help me here, Carrillo and Anacapa. Thank you. And I thought I was, at least I was told I was very fair to Commissioners Adams and Peugeot. So I wouldn't mind going and speaking, certainly not in opposition to Commissioner Peugeot, but at least to provide, I think, Commissioner Suding's opinion, which I think on a case-by-case basis, and not have such draconian language in terms of our ability to make choices.
Well,
I'd be
shall
happy
we
to.
send both Mr. Drury and Mr. Peugeot, if that is... Thank you very much for going this. It just represents how controversial this item is.
Not only that, we're going to meet and walk the existing curb extensions.
At the
Yes, they
height
are.
of traffic. All right.
Late at night, right?
Thank you for coming, Ms. Self. Thank you. I think since we are minus item 1 and item 2, we'll jump right to you, Mr. Limon, for item number 3.
I do have a subcommittee report.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did miss subcommittee report. I completely skipped by it. Thank you. Will you please do that?
Okay, Madam Chair, we met with the subcommittee for the Victoria Street project near the Arlington.
Yes, we did.
And you were there, and
Yes.
Mr. Peugeot was in attendance, as well as the architects that day. And we discussed how they've moved one of the buildings back 5 feet as per requirement. We also looked at the sort of transparent entry and the approach from the point of view of framing an important archway on the Arlington, or important balcony on the Arlington Theater side, and and we looked at the back ramp, and that was turning out good. And Commissioner Drury will be pleased to know we discussed the back of the Arlington and really lowering the walls, taking away the trellis, and making that as transparent as possible. So those were all good developments. From what I understand, they're working on things and will resubmit in a month or so. We'll find out what that schedule is. But it was a productive meeting, lots of discussion, and Commissioner Peugeot or Madam Chairperson, would you like to add anything to this discussion?
I think the only thing I would add is that their decision was to come back to the full commission, because our thought was there are enough changes to the underground parking lot that are going to generate other possible changes, and there should be discussion about that entry and looking at the balconies. So I think coming back to the full commission will allow them to start at a baseline to move forward with the subcommittee. So I hope the commission agrees about that.
They are moving with CAD drawings, because right now they have this other program which is more SketchUp. It's more conceptual and 3D and so forth. And it's not that precise, because there are some things that they look nicely from a distance with all the color and all that, but they start looking at the details and they're not really traditional, so they need to change technology basically to present drawings.
Thank you. Mr. Adams for reminding us. Yes.
On October 5th, Commissioner Jury, Commissioner Sharp, and myself met with the El Encanto team and reviewed the entire set of plans and details for Mission Village. There were considerable number of comments, and today at the consent calendar, we again went through all the plans and addressed every single comment that we had. There were some that weren't caught or weren't addressed to our satisfaction. So we gave it a final with comments to return to staff and the subcommittee if need be. One item I did want to bring up to the Commission's attention was the east property line at Mission Village and the requirement by Public Works that there not be any vegetation within that easement, which is a 20-foot wide easement, that is taller than 2 feet. I directed the applicant and Kathleen Kennedy, the planner, to perhaps get Public Works, the applicant, and the whole commission in one room, and let's somehow hammer out a compromise on that east property line, because I do feel that vegetation is the right way to screen that property line, not a fence, not a wall, anything like that. So you might be seeing that, and I hope the commission feels the same way that I do, that it needs to be the Public Works needs to lighten up on that condition or compromise on that condition if possible.
Thank you. And I certainly do appreciate Mr. Sharp and yours and Mr. Dury's amount of time and attention to this subcommittee. I think we do a great service to the applicants in generating these subcommittees and putting in extra time beyond the commission hours.
It's been a lot of time.
I know.
Commissioner Suding, myself, and Commissioner Sheldon, we spent another 2 hours this morning. So it's...
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I would agree with the direction that Commissioner Suding to reach a compromise on the vegetation. It's a unique, important project, and to not have taller screening than 2 feet. It's a unique situation, and I hope taller landscaping can prevail in some fashion for softening the project for this very important neighborhood.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to mention real quick that we did approve it today at consent with the taller vegetation. So the landscape architect and the applicant need to work out with Public Works how that's going to happen. But
To be clear, the applicant wants to do the
Yes.
taller screening. This is a fight between HLC and Public Works, really, with the applicant doing our legwork for us.
Yes.
That's essentially what's happening.
Thank you. Goodness, 2 feet. Arbitrary.
it seems arbitrary to me.
Yes.
But then again, you have the benefit of Public Works there.
Oh, Mr. DeForest.
Thank you. So I was there too.
Oh,
And,
thank you for your hours.
This sudden problem, I hadn't realized that the part of the I hadn't sunk in that a water line had to be moved because the current water lane runs through the El Encanto property. So they were moving it to the east side. And my question is, and I presume this draconian no planting or 2 feet, I don't know where the 2 feet is coming from, plant material is so in case is to prevent larger plants from roots damaging the water main. I don't know. I would think they could make water mains. I mean, there's certainly plenty of water mains that have trees near them. I don't know what their problem is, but this is an important situation because obviously the El Encanto, or that end of El Encanto, especially with these new Mission Village buildings, does need screening, and it's just, and obviously I think Public Works is working off some kind of guidelines in the office and not being really appreciative of the situation, the specific situation there on off Mission Bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest, yes.
On that note, I wonder if we could have some representative of Public Works come here and explain this, or issue a memo or something. I mean, to me, this is, the government agencies need to justify to the people their decisions, not the other way around. And it does seem arbitrary. It should be left to, if it's a root problem, then it's a landscape architect decides which plants have invasive roots, that type of thing. If it's a mass problem where they don't want to have to move a large object to get to a maintenance issue, then that's whatever it is. But to my understanding, there's no justification. It's just somebody made a decision somewhere, and that's it. And that isn't the way it works. There needs to be a justification here, and I want to know personally what the justification is.
Is this something that we can request? Oh, I'm sorry, the Public Works to...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think there was also a mention of fire safety. That was also brought into the mix.
That didn't have to do with the 2-foot height restriction, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we could certainly get back some more information and talk to our case planner who has had these good discussions.
I see.
And give you the basis of why that is being required.
Great, thanks. We'll be educated. I think now, unless there is more subcommittee reports or public discussion, we can go to Mr. Limon's presentation.
Meeting adjourned.
Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the commissioners for taking the time to come down to just deal with a non-project related item. I appreciate your time. You just heard that what type of guideline language is critical. So I wanted to sort of explain how the Historic Landmarks Commission rules and meeting procedures and guidelines relate to your EPV guidelines, because what you'll see is that we are introducing into this document for the first time more guideline language because we feel it's necessary. And I'll give you some backgrounds to understand the evolution of this document. Since the formation of the Historic Landmarks Commission, Landmarks Committee, there have always been meeting rules that establish how and when you meet, and the procedures for creating agendas and for agendizing items. Those meeting procedures also evolved into some specific direction on how to deal with applications and the difficult decisions that you make. The evolution of that also has been that we've tended to not focus on this document as being the primary guideline document. Your EPV guidelines were the primary document. And what has happened, as you may be aware, is that we have slowly given you more authority for projects outside the El Pueblo Viejo district. That's gotten you to be more busy because you're now dealing with historic resources throughout the city, even outside El Pueblo Viejo. You're also dealing with projects that are single-family residential development that need to comply with the NPO because they happen to be in the hillside and they are historic. So there's another layer of additional purview that you have. And as you know, the single-family residential review design guidelines are quite detailed. And up to a point where you could point compliance with those guidelines to another review board's guidelines, it's kind of confusing for applicants. So what we thought was necessary is that we'd like to incorporate the same language that those boards conduct their reviews into your guideline documents. And we attempted to do this, I don't know if Mr. Adams remembers this, to insert about 10 pages of landscape guidelines in this document. And it was felt that that would sort of change the tone of these guidelines. And so we backed off that and said, well, we'll come back one day and change your other guidelines and insert that information. Because what we want to do is provide information to applicants so they know that these are applicable guidelines. And it's very difficult if you present guidelines from another board and say, oh, by the way, the HLC uses these guidelines that were adopted by this board. So we want you to look at these guidelines and say, do you agree with them? You may, in fact, adjust them somewhat if you feel there are statements or comments, direction to applicants that you disagree with. However, we believe that we've been through the document. I've actually had Heather Baker, before she went on leave, go through them and carefully point out areas that have been updated in other guidelines to try to make them as consistent with other review boards that are in the city. However, there are specific elements of review that are somewhat different. For example, in the El Pueblo Viejo district, for example, you have specific plant species that are different than what would be allowed in other parts of the city. So today I would like to take the opportunity to sort of highlight where we think the insertion of language has occurred that would be new language, so you have that benefit. And the reason I didn't give you a strikeout version is because it would be quite convoluted. So we've had close to 10 reviewers, and we have revisions and edits on top of edits, and so it's not a very clean document. What I would rather have today is to have you be advised of where I think you should look carefully, and what I would like to have happen is hopefully you agree that there are no major changes that you see or object to, and that you either direct us to return back for actual recommendation to council that they be adopted, or that you defer to individuals on this commission to work with us. That seems to be a good process where commissioners or a committee works with staff to work out some of the language if you feel it needs work. So that's sort of an introduction to this. That's what I'd like to accomplish. So with that, I'd like to delve into the document, unless you have some additional questions based on what I've said.
No, I think, why don't you...
Okay. So we have the doc... Yeah, we can get my document now. Yes. We have introduced, to begin with, the Historic Commission, Landmarks Commission goals. It's consistent with what we do in other guidelines, where we either indicate objectives or goals that are outlined either in your city charter or in other guidelines or the city historic structures ordinance. And what we've done is paraphrased information that basically says why these guidelines were put together, for the main purpose. You may also comment on those goals. I mean, those are established that we have not made these goals up, so they've been extracted from other documents.
Do you want those comments now, or?
I would prefer to hold them if you have them, that we accept red marks unless you believe it bears discussion among other commissioners. If you think there's some need for have them, I would, okay, then jump right in.
Jump right in, okay. Just real quickly, the goals don't talk about landscape or open space, and perhaps the way to address that is in B, bullet point B, compatibility of landscape and architectural styles. It just mentions architectural. And then in H, say, to promote high standards in landscape and architectural design. I feel cheated.
Do other commissioners object to that?
I don't object. I think that's rather wise.
Okay.
And astute on the part of Commissioner Suding.
And the reason I wanted to have other commissioners sort of chew on it a bit too was because we do review a lot of open space, and open space is increasingly important on projects, and I think that needs to be stated in our goals.
Thank you.
Oh.
Madam Chair, do you want to take individual public comment or wait till the end?
Why don't we wait till the end? Can you make notes? Is that all right, Kellen?
Fine.
Okay.
So I would prefer to,
We got to get through it.
what I would like to see added is the term cultural landscape.
Okay, well, Kellen, can you sort of make a list? Because I imagine you're going to have comments about other sections as well.
Okay.
All right.
I'll make a list. I can do it.
Okay.
It would be better.
I think so. If we
Yeah.
accumulate everything, we'll sort of move. Yes.
Shall we go by sections? Because there are very different sections. Can we go like each clear section, like?
That's what I was planning to do, Mr.
So
President.
we'll go section by section, Kellerman. Why don't you do it section by section? All right? Yes, Mr. Drury?
In an effort to please Commissioner Suding and Commissioner Adams, then item H and the goals should probably reflect the same sort of language. An architectural and landscape design and the construction of...
Yeah, he added that, B and H.
It wasn't B, it was H?
B and H.
Oh, good. Thank you. You're a lot sharper than I.
Okay, I'll continue, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm going to focus initially on the table of contents, so that will give you a better understanding of how we have new sections that have been added to the document. Into the introduction of the document, we have added guideline interpretation application, relationship to other documents, guideline organization, supplemental city design guidelines, and supplemental federal and state design guidelines. So those insertions are consistent with other guidelines, and so you would be looking at the introduction and noticing that that is new language. So
Thank you.
I'd like to have you look at that. Under Part 1, Architectural Design, Section 1, Historical Significance, all structures. Again, we thought that it was important to denote that the Historic Landmarks Commission does something different than other boards and commissions. They focus on historical significance of structures and what that process entails, and how an applicant must plan for that as they move forward into our process. So that is new language. Section 2 is energy efficiency, green building design. That is also consistent with a language that's found in the Single Family Design Board guidelines and the ABR guidelines. So it's new language that's not currently or has not been in your guidelines or rules of meetings and procedures. Section 3, this is of particular importance to me because it deals with administrative approval standards and what type of projects are you allowing staff to approve. And if you notice this section, we have two sections, one specific to commercial and multifamily, and one specific to single-family residential design guidelines. What we've done is we've inserted the single-family residential design administrative approval standards, which allow essentially more projects to be approved by staff. With the caveat, so I just want to make you understand that projects that are identified as being designated do not qualify for those administrative approvals. So if you see, or if you have a concern about an addition being approved by staff, if it's historic, we would be consulting with our urban historian first and deciding whether this should move forward to the commission. So I just wanted to quantify that or limit that there are limits on these administrative approvals. So if you have some issues with what's on the list, we would like to hear. We would like to hear if you want it modified. And in years past, just to let you know, the Historic Landmarks Commission did in fact deviate from what the ABR or the single-family reviews allowed. So it's okay to do that if you're interested in that. Section 5, zoning modification comments. This is an area that, let me see if I have this right. Okay. Are you reading Section 5? What do you have on your document? Zoning
Modification
okay.
comments.
Just want to make sure I have it. Okay. That is an insertion of language that we've inserted in all the review boards that give guidance on what type of comments are appropriate when you see a project with a zoning modification request. Obviously, we're not here to have you approve a project with a modification. We're here to hear comments on the appropriateness of that type of design for compatibility with the neighborhood and so forth. Along with Section 6, this is there's a new standard. I don't know if this was explained. Is that a different one? Yeah. Maybe we're pulling up the wrong document.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Can you find this document? the table of contents. The change.
This is section 5 of part 1. That's the
Yes,
one a different part. I think.
part 1. Okay, that's right. Can you scroll up? I can barely see up there. I'm sorry. Go up to.
There it is. That's it.
That's landscape. Keep going. That's part 2. Keep going. We're lost here. There we go.
Yeah, we
there
are.
we go. I'm sorry. So the last section there on the page is there is an allowance now to have 2 uncovered parking spaces with specific criteria, and this section explains that new provision, where someone can ask, and this commission can decide whether that's appropriate. Keep going. The next part 2 is essentially all new. So this would be, again, another focus for the landscape architects to look at. That part 2, the entirety of that document was created as part of the NPO update and primarily motivated by making sure that there were clear standards for designs dealing with single-family development. But we think it also pertains to any other project. However, if you have an exception on any particular guideline, we'd like to hear about that also. So that would be an entire new part 2 that would need to be also reviewed. If we can scroll down, to part 3. This is where we have less of the changes involved with the document. Meeting procedures were originally spelled out in the original document. Let's see. There we go. And where you see where we've added some information is how we deal with discussion items and cultural resource studies. We thought it was important to note that that's part of your agendas, and there are discussions that occur in how we deal with those issues. And this is the first issue that I think I want to talk to you about, which has changed. The idea of the preliminary approval level. We went to City Council yesterday with a proposal that proposes to change the terminology of preliminary approval. And as I shared with City Council, if you look at the definition of preliminary in the Webster's, it implies that it's the predecessor to something that's more important to happen, a following action. And that's where the public gets confused. They often look at your preliminary approval decisions and hear, as part of those decisions, that the project will return for additional review. And therefore, they don't connect that that is the most critical land entitlement decision that occurs, that essentially they have a project to proceed. And those decisions should be appealed if they intend to object to those approvals. Unfortunately, we've dealt with numerous applicants that have come forward late in the process and have indicated that they were unaware that they should have appealed at preliminary approval. So our city planner has advocated this change. Our frontline staff thinks it's confusing for people. All of a sudden, we have to readapt and change what we know as preliminary to project design approval. However, we think there's a long-term benefit to the public, and therefore we are going to hopefully try to bear with these changes, because it does involve a blanket change to all our guidelines and all our agendas. So be seeing that if council agrees. Right now, they've given us the tentative green light to go forward to introduce that change to the city council. So I don't know if you all have any discussion about that. I spoke to the chair, and she was a little bit concerned about the change.
Very much concerned.
Yeah.
Are we looking at agenda organization?
No, review levels on page IV, which would be 4.
Yeah, there are actually different points. It is under agenda organization. You would now see project design approval, but it also would be delineated as a level of review.
And then so the preliminary review language is going to be gone. I like that.
Okay. So we have one support.
Madam Chair?
We'll discuss this section by section.
Well, we can. If this seems to be one of the major changes in the section, I wasn't going to discuss other than 3 more items on the section. So if you have concerns, it would be the time to convey them on that issue. I'd like to continue to move on and explain all the changes, unless.
Madam Chair?
Well,
Go ahead.
well, why don't you finish this section in terms of your explanation,
Okay.
and then we will return to this item, if we may.
Okay. The other
3 areas.
that we're going to be looking at changing, and you'll see in the document that we have them cross-hatched out as items that are still being developed. And it has to do with actions, where am I? 2.9. Yeah, time limits on approvals, time extensions, and appeals of HLC decisions. There, let me talk to you about, or let me speak to you about time extensions versus time approvals. Currently, you're well aware that you could have multiple approvals on a project. You've had actually examples where projects were presented to you and you were informed that their land use entitlement was still valid, but their design review had expired. Right. And it put you in I thought, an awkward position of having to grant a new approval. Our city attorney is very concerned about that process, that if you have, in fact, granted a preliminary approval, that is, in fact, an important step for an applicant. And even though there might have been some mix-up in the deadlines or expirations, that to take away that preliminary approval is, in fact, problematic. So therefore, he has actually proposed an amendment that would not place those decisions before you, that it would all be based on the land entitlement decision. For example, if you have a planning commission approval and you have a design review approval, the land use decision approval would be the longest period typically involved with that entitlement, and that would run with your approval. So you wouldn't have to worry about your design review approval expiration. It would basically run with your land use entitlement. And that would also help applicants not have to worry about 2 expiration dates. They ask the city, what is my expiration date on my approval? And we would look at, if you have an entitlement from the Planning Commission, that has a specific set allotment of time. It's either 2, 3, some up to 4 years. You have that time to go get your preliminary approval by the commission or final approval, depending on where you're at, and get a building permit. And if you need an extension, the community development director would make that decision as to whether an extension is appropriate. And that would be it. There would not be a return, as the current process is, where staff can give 1 time extension, and then the commission can give another, and the commission give a third. It just is problematic from a standpoint of our process. And we also view this as it's less time to deal with extensions. We don't want to be always having to do in writing back and saying you know processing extensions. We think it's going to simplify the approach. So our proposal would be to allow 3 years after project design approval, which is the old preliminary approval, essentially, to go get a final approval and or a building permit. So you would have 3 years after preliminary, which we intend to change, and you could have a 2-year extension if you needed more time. So up to 5 years, and that would be it. Does that make it so? And that's just when you're dealing with this commission only, when you're not dealing with the planning commission. So that's how that would be governed. We think that's adequate time. You have 3 years, go get your building permit, and for some reason, the exception would be to grant an extension of those additional 2 years.
So in the new language, it would be 3 years after the in-progress review.
The preliminary, which would be changed, the project design. Yes.
I don't see how it. I don't see how it integrates with final HLC final approval, final design review approval.
The most important step, again, is preliminary, which is going to be changed to project design approval. So we believe that if you get a preliminary approval, which would again be project design approval, that is when the clock should start. It shouldn't start at final.
That's what's appealable.
Yes, and that's where we would like to identify that you need to go take care of business and go get a final and or a building permit, or both, within those 3 years. It gives you that 3, yeah. And if you need more time, you could come back to the community development director, and he would consider whether he should grant another 2 years, and not therefore require you to come back before the commission to deal with that issue. It's consistent with our land use approval process. If you understand what happens at the planning commission and show decisions, those decisions do not go back to the planning commission. They are handled by staff. Does that make it clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. The second component of that issue are appeals of HLC decisions. One of the things that concerns the city attorney is the length of time where you can reconsider an item with respect to your decisions. And we've advised this commission as well as other boards that you shouldn't wait a week or two to decide to reconsider a project, that there are time limits on that process. And currently our language speaks to placing the item on the next agenda. Well, we've had instances where commissioners did not contact us to place that item on the next agenda. And therefore, we get into this awkward situation of, well, you know, making a request to place it on a subsequent agenda. So, consistent with what other boards and commissions and the city council does, is they give you a time frame to change your mind, or to reconsider a project. And that time frame is pretty tight. In other words, during the meeting, if you decide to reconsider, you can make a motion to reconsider during that same meeting, or 2 to 3 days after the meeting date, you would advise staff that you would like to have that item reconsidered on the next agenda. That is the window of opportunity. And the only exception to that would be is if there was misrepresentation or a need to reconsider on the basis of some error made. And we could visit, but those are different than changing your opinion on a matter. So this is language that is still being developed, and I apologize I didn't have the final version, but it will come back to you. But I wanted to introduce the concept there so you're aware that there will be additional direction on that issue. Does that explain that issue? Okay. Those are the only changes in the meeting section that are major that needed to have my focus.
So, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I've been dying to discuss the change of preliminary approval to project design approval. I don't think project design approval makes it any more clear to the applicant or to the public that it should be appealed at that level. Instead, I think it would be better to make it clear to the applicant or to the public as much as we can, and maybe that's by noticing when a project gets noticed that after preliminary approval, that's the level that it should be appealed. But I don't see how project design approval, that those words make it any more clear that it should be appealed at that level, if that's what you're trying to achieve.
I think it's more the removal of preliminary. Now, I think we can argue about whether that's the right language to use, but the removal of preliminary will improve the confusion. And you might not like the introduction of these words.
I don't know. To me, preliminary approval is you are granted approval on a preliminary level. I don't have the problem with preliminary, I guess, that you are experiencing with other people.
With the public.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you personally have a problem with the word preliminary. I'm saying that you experience. I chose my words there, but
so would you advocate leaving it?
I would.
Okay.
I really would.
We have one person. Does anyone agree with that?
Yes, I do.
I do not.
2? 1?
I do not agree with that. I think getting rid of that word entirely, because it implies that there's much more stuff to come.
There is.
And what it really means is that when that's granted and we start fiddling about with it, we get in trouble with staff and with city council and with the applicant. I think the idea of not having that word anywhere in the approval process is a great idea. A great idea.
I agree with Mr. Drury. I think if you tell people that this design has been approved, they get the idea. The design is approved. The details are not approved, but the design is approved. Whereas when you say preliminary approval is, well, it's kind of like a temporary thing and it can go away. And I think it's very, very clear. I've been on this for, 20 years. And oh, yeah, preliminary is important. I mean, in every meeting somebody says, oh, remember, preliminary is important, approval. But I think I agree with staff that the term preliminary undermines the importance of the approval that is granted. Maybe the term project design approval is not the perfect one, but I agree that the term preliminary is a weak term.
I think the new language will help the Commission to not get into the situation you did with the project overlooking Brinkerhoff, that, you know, you granted it, you sent it on to the Planning Commission, but you really weren't comfortable with it. I think the stronger language will make you think to be more comfortable before you send it on. Maybe it's not the exact word that Phil wants.
Mr. Schallenberger?
Well, I guess one of my a question is that are we changing it so that final approval is no longer appealable as well?
No. Let me clarify the motivation. It's not to indicate that a final approval is not required. As some staff interpreted the changes, well, we are eliminating final approval from the process. No. What the motivation is, again, to emphasize this approval step that's occurring. And the expectation is that we would see your motions read something to the effect of project design approval granted with a indefinite continuance for the review of final details or an in-progress review. It indicates that there's additional review required, but it quantifies that those decisions will be dealing with these minor, more subtle, details, the ornamentation of the building, the landscape plans. We think that every final approval decision does still have a potential for an appeal, but it would be very specific that there was a scope that was being reviewed. It was the consistency of those details, that whether that was consistent with your project design approval. I think it will still work fine, and people will have a better understanding of what they can and cannot appeal.
Jake, you said something just a second ago. I don't know if this was intentional, but you talked about granting project design approval before going to Planning Commission. That's not really how it works. It goes. You get preliminary. Okay. Okay.
I still think that the stronger language will help you guys to realize that is a major step.
Okay.
Are there any other comments from the commissioners? Yeah. I didn't ask for public comment. I will voice what I had spoken to Mr. Limon about. I'm concerned about that type of language which says project design approval. That to me is a very complete, large, blanket term, which I think is very deceptive. And I feel very strongly that, in fact, there is a lot to be designed and done before final approval, and I think relegating it to a subsidiary status is not the right way to go. And in fact, I think we always have to be reminded that at a conceptual level, despite the fact that it is simply comments, that we are making major decisions about mass, bulk, and scale, which we are not always remembering. And that, yes, preliminary is important, but in my mind, each level of decision is incredibly important to the success of the project, and I don't like the concept of loading preliminary or project at that level as the one big project design approval. So, Mr. DeForest.
I want to point out from Councilor DeForest, I would like to point out the problems that exist in these things, and the applicants, or some applicants,
Mr. DeForest,
game.
Yes.
It's on. Oh, no, it isn't. Excuse me. Some applicants playing a game, extending things to the max, and coming in, and the commissions have completely changed personnel, and feelings have changed. The Chapala Street fiasco, in my mind, buildings changed public opinion. And that brings to the problem is, and how to alert the public, and we try to do this, or I try to do this with the Pearl Chase Society, but is to alert the public that what's going on. If it takes a while for it to sink into the public what this project is going to be, and if it's just project approval sometimes can go pretty quickly, and by the time it gets project approval, then the citizenry suddenly finds that this project is going to go through, and then what can they do when they get all very angry? So how do you propose to handle or alert the public to projects that then have had, whatever term you want to use, appealable approval? That they need to go to city council or pay their money, or at least be alerted to what's going on here or before the planning commission. And another question I have is, what is the order? Approval here and then to the planning commission, or go to the planning commission and then to the come here?
Madam Chair, if I could try to answer both concerns.
Yes.
The first question with respect to how we educate the public on this change. We have heard from Mr. Suding that maybe the agendas or our notices could be more clear, explaining that there's a specific time period for an appeal. We have not historically assumed that we needed to tell people how to appeal a project all the time. It's more because there's a change in process. We would have to educate the public in our manner, and I would anticipate having that be part of an outreach to neighborhood groups and additional explanation. It's an opportunity for us to explain the process more, and we envision that to be a productive endeavor. When we change an ordinance, we have to notify specific groups that we are changing it for a specific reason. So I think that's going to be a positive. And then the second question, that we are not proposing to change the sequential order of when this decision gets made. I believe that, again, you still have a ability to not grant a approval if you are not comfortable with the design. And if you're concerned with the massing of the building, then I would recommend that you resolve that issue before you grant a project design approval. I know there are details that you'd like to have a progress or make additional improvements, but that's what the in-progress review is for. It's saying, don't go and design the entirety of the building. Come back for an in-progress on this issue if you want to continue that dialogue. And I would recommend that you use that as the provision that allows you to give them a design approval with something pending out there that you'd like to have focus on. But at least it gives the opportunity for the appellants that want to appeal to, because most times they want to appeal not necessarily the architectural design, they want to appeal the use, the size and height for the building, something that's, or in privacy impacts. So they can still proceed with that with the understanding that you're working out on some specific issue. That's my understanding of.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Drury.
It's really, we're talking about language, right? I mean, it's basically language. It seems to me, if I was a citizen,
You are.
I am, that's right. If I was an applicant, that concept review should be followed by in-progress review. That seems to be a logical flow. You brought a concept before the commission. They've made their comments. You come back with the comments embedded in your new plans or your modified plans in an in-progress review. If that goes well, then you're given a project design approval. It seems to me that's that one more meeting for the public to be either alerted or for the word to get out over that 2-week period, and then it goes to the final review. It seems to me that would be a more logical language: concept, in progress, project design, final review. Because the in progress is in progress, and when they've gone through that part of the review, and they come a month later or whatever, then they're asking for project design approval, because embedded in that modification of the plans that's been before the commission is all these things that we've said over the course of those 2 hearings or 3 hearings or whatever.
But that all depends on the scope of the project. I mean, you might only need one concept review, and then you integrate those comments, and then you get...
You could do that. I mean, that machinery is already there anyway to do that, if so.
Mr. Drury, I understand your point, but I think what our concern would be to not inform the public that it's still a conceptual stage. And so concept continued is that very clear direction that there has been no approval and that we're still seeking a approval of either a land entitlement or a design review approval. So I guess we could call it concept in progress or in progress concept review if you really think about it. But it could be quite confusing if we muddle it up more. So that's not part of our proposal.
Okay. All right. Well, just have first review, second review, and final review, something like that. But no matter what words are used for that approval, I think the key lies in educating the applicants and the public. Period. Doesn't matter what you call it, but as long as the public and the applicants know what their rights are at that level.
That's correct, Mr. Suding. We have a handout that we hand out to folks. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not given to the appellants or the interested parties. And we also, again, Ms. Gantz has pointed out that we have appeal language on the agendas, but it isn't specific to preliminary approval. So again, it says all actions or any action can be appealed. So, yeah, we could add some more information that would make it very clear.
And I have to confess, Mr. Limon has been trying to educate me to be a little bit more verbal to applicants in saying they have a certain amount of days to appeal and so on and so forth. But now I'm wondering if, in fact, I shouldn't be further educated and say that at concept review and announce to the applicant and those people who are here to listen to it that the next level of review is very important and will basically set the building. If you say it before the next approval, that is giving them plenty of notice. And those who are interested will be there at the concept review and can further promulgate that information to those who could not be here. So I'm thinking that's another level of education, that the chair should say it at the time of concept comments.
Good point. Maybe that's under the chairperson roles or stuff. But I have one other comment. One thing that's sort of troubling me at this point is we're talking about. I'm not clear how this is good for the applicants. All we've talked about so far are the appellants and this commission, and it's sort of reinforcing a view that there's this adversarial relationship that it's us against the applicant, and I really, really resent that. This process is not easy for an applicant in Santa Barbara. And so I would like to see something, whether it's in this document or in the guidelines especially, there's really no recognition of the applicant's rights and how this is good for the applicants. It talks about lots of things, but the applicants we're here to serve the applicants, not to dictate to them. And I really want to see some more recognition of that in some way. I mean, in fact, goals of the commission, the first page, item A should be to recognize the rights of applicants. I mean, that is not a primary thing in my experience here anyway. The discussions that we have don't talk about the applicant's rights, and it puts it in a subservient level that I really don't appreciate.
Excuse me, what are the...
Excuse me, that wasn't a question or a discussion item.
Madam Chair, if I could answer the question or point out my point of view is that I believe clarity of your guidelines does improve an applicant's position.
Correct.
I use these guidelines to help applicants to say, look, this is what our rules, meeting procedure are, and if you move forward, there are limits that this commission can take as far as reconsidering an item, having an appeal filed late. I mean, I think we're motivated also to improve the process for applicants. That's the motivation behind the time expression of approvals. We could just take the tact of like, well, that's our process, and you have to ask for extensions multiple times. So there's some motivation, and
Great.
I believe that our customer service commitment in our and when you become a board member is very prevalent. We expect you to have a behavioral sort of tilt towards providing good, excellent customer service, while you tell them to do things that they don't want to do sometimes.
I would agree with you very much, Jaime. I feel very strongly that, we have an ordinance. And if we just had the ordinance, the applicant and the commission would not be well served. There has to be some consistent interpretation that we all agree on, that the applicant may read and that we must refer to. Otherwise, the rules of the game are not clear. This is the best service we could possibly do for the applicant, in my mind. I utterly agree with you. The clearer and more consistent these guidelines are, the better everybody else
And
is.
I would encourage you to insert any type of rule that you think would be a clarity in how you conduct these meetings.
I agree. This is the first that we've talked about how it benefits the applicant, though, and we're an hour into this discussion.
Madam Chair? I would agree with Commissioner Schellenberger in that the life of the city and the economic health of the city depends on projects being made. I know that we serve them well. I know that staff serves them very well, serves us well, for that matter. But I wouldn't mind seeing in the commission goals something stating the I don't know how we'd put it, but something that welcomes the applicant somehow. Yes, all these are designed to protect the city and to help the applicant, but it would be nice somehow if there was a sentence in there. And I'm not sure what the language.
Mr. Drury, we can develop a sentence that addresses their perspective and your goal to also assist them in the review process, if that's one of the goals.
I think it would be just, it's polite, I think it would be, I think it would go a long way to foster maybe sometimes it is adversarial, and I think it would go a long way to maybe fostering something that.
Why don't we work on it, developing that, and we'll share that with you next time.
Yes, Mr. Peugeot.
I think maybe something item D is where it maybe should be. D and F talk about the economy. And if you use the word vitality, you say to strengthen the economy and vitality of the city, which has to do with other things. I think it should be added there as a goal, personally. You may want to talk about that.
The economic vitality.
Well, it does to strengthen the economy and vitality of the city, because it's also cultural vitality. There's a whole bunch of other things. And I tend to agree with that. I'm not sure how to word it, but there is I noticed imbalance. I'm not sure exactly how you wanna word it, but I'm looking forward to that.
I'll make my attempt.
Now, there are some other sections that we're going to discuss now, right?
Yeah.
Especially, I like to, I have my own markups, and it has to do mainly with the administrative approvals. I think
Yes.
that is quite a big thing that I would like to talk to. I'm not sure if this is the right time or not.
Shall we then start back again, in which we begin with the table of contents, and let me ask, are there any comments or questions about the introduction? If there are none, are there any?
What do you mean the introduction?
I'm going back to the table of contents, starting from the very beginning.
My comment is that this is an incredibly well-written document. I really tip my hat to whoever put this together and analyzed all these different guidelines and summarized them so briefly and so well done. Very nice, thank you. Very well done.
Next is Part 1. Is there any comment on Section 1, Section 2?
Yeah. I have just a minor comment to consider in the Section 2, which is energy efficient and green building design. There's a movement going on with this country where there's not only green building design, but there's starting to be attention to green site design. The Sustainable Sites Initiative is an initiative in development right now. But I'd like to see, whenever we mention green building design, to also say something like green building and site design, to at least to consider that. Because there's not only the walls, but it's the open space context perhaps, or the site that affects that. It's just a little small language adjustment there.
Yes.
But we need to consider that.
Thank you. Section 3. There are no comments. Section 5. That's zoning modification comments. Let's move to under architectural.
Yeah, those are the administrative approval standards.
Okay.
And this is the concern. I'll be right. Right now, I imagine there are things at borderline, and whoever is at the counter, or maybe it's you, Mr. Limon, you will go to, let's talk to the city historian, so, maybe there's something there. The question is, well, what happens when there is no city historian? Maybe the position is eliminated because of budget cuts. Well, I mean, we had times where there were no historians, right? So how that? I mean, this has to be completely devoid of personalities of people. It has to be kind of a function that works in automatic pilot. I mean, it's something that works regardless of who is in charge of taking care of this. So that's why some of the comments I'm going to do are based on that, because you always kind of worry about, well, what can go wrong.
Mr. Peugeot, I just wanted to remind you that I did indicate that designated structures do not qualify for administrative approval. So that, in a sense, does defer these decisions to the commission typically. The gray area is when a project is not been listed or identified as a worthy of designation. And that's where we do rely on our urban historian to make those decisions. And for the most part, I think he's quite conservative when it comes to the extent of changes. Sure. He's often told me, no, the commission should look at this. I said, I've encouraged him to approve certain things.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, I'm totally comfortable with the way it's working now. I'm trying to figure out what happens in case.
The way to tighten up the gray area would be to indicate that if it is dealing with a potential historic resource, that decision be either made by the commission or the historian, either or available. Right now, that's sort of an informal policy, that it's not written within the guidelines.
Okay, and on page 10, let me go through and maybe, Page 10, we talk about 3.2C, it talks about decks, new or altered decks, right? And if I'm thinking in terms of the historic districts, and a deck is something that really doesn't exist historically. A deck is a new invention. It's something that, you do have some wood decks somewhere, but in general you have a covered porch. A deck is something that's going to rot, and something historically, traditionally is not done because, it's not. So I have a little bit of a difficulty approving decks automatically. It is part of the architectural vocabulary that is non-traditional to begin with.
Right. There's also a size limit to that, the 200 square feet. But generally, what they mean by when he's talking about the decks is not on the front of the house, but on the back of the house, where it's not visible from the public right away. We do allow, and the Secretary of the Interior standards also allow for additions to the rear of the building, which are not visible from the public, or would change the physical characteristics that give the building its historic significance or potential historic significance. So those would be pretty much to the rear.
Mr. Peugeot, where you look under the specific criteria under why they would be, where the following standards would be met, you could quantify either the size of the deck further by saying 200 square feet is too large. That could be one way to limit the types of that the staff would review, or indicate that a certain type of deck would not be subject to this provision.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm raising a flag. I'm not sure what the solution is. I wonder how the rest of the commission feels or how staff feels. Obviously, you have come out with that conclusion that 200 square feet in the back of the building, not visible from the street. I'm just raising the flag that a deck is really not a traditional element. A patio is traditional, a covered porch is traditional. an open deck, a wood deck, whether it's Trex or redwood or whatever, is something rather contemporary.
Mr. Peugeot, I'll point out to you, in fact, your concern is valid to me in that sense. It says decks, but it says new or altered decks or porches. And this is contained under C, decks. It contains the word porch, which should not be contained here.
Madam Chair, originally this was an offshoot of the residential portion, and I think we try to customize it to just deal with decks and eliminate porches because we wouldn't find those elements on commercial and multifamily as common. So we could eliminate the porch reference or decks in its entirety. If you want to tighten that up, I think that's what Mr. Peugeot is saying, that there are certain decks that would raise caution.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Drury.
Also, the proposed deck is not likely to be more noticeable. That not likely is an area, a very gray area. I think the language should be much more draconian. The proposed deck is not visible from a public right-of-way.
Madam Chair, what I think we would recommend here is that if we are going to speak wordsmithing or improving the guidelines, that we refer to a subcommittee. I gladly work with Mr. Peugeot or someone else to work out where his comfort level would work with the commission's.
Yes, I think we've brought up our concerns, and we can, shall we move on?
And then we can work.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I want to go back to what qualifies a bill. Where did it go? What qualifies project eligible for administrative approval.
What page?
Page 8.
Page 8, Section 3. There is sort of and it's not here in print, that anything over 50 years old, I know there by now many things over 50 years old or older are probably could get by, or tract houses could get by with administrative approval. But certainly, but now it's only, this language says only designated city landmarks and structures of merits are not eligible for administrative approval. I think that's a lot of potential, or even though they haven't been judged potential structures, will fall through the cracks with this language. And I think some language that at least the city historian or somebody, a committee, if there's no city historian, look at the proposed project, or look at the proposed project if the structure is over 50 years old. Also, we've had a couple of glitches in the administrative approval thing. For example, the legal aid place, legal aid house up here, and there was a big hoorah, at least at the Pearl Chase Society Preservation Committee, that the structure was administratively approved with no HLC review to have modern siding put on, when of course the structure, if it was being restored, would have to have the grooves of a 19th century siding. And there were a lot of unhappy people there. And then of course, and that was a glitch, but certainly what's it called, Our Lady of Guadalupe does not look like the historic structure that they tore down. So I think I would like to see what qualifies for administrative approval be not enlarged but tightened. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just want to clarify that the demolition review study area does require that anything within those 9 potential survey areas, if it's a building greater than 50 years of age, I do look at it and make a determination as to whether it requires a structures report or not. And so that's already built into the system. And I do take it very seriously when I review the buildings. The legal aid building, I would defy anybody to really tell that now that it's been completed that it doesn't look exactly like it did before they started. It was a well-done job in terms of trying to preserve a building and give it another 50 to 75 years worth of useful life.
I think this is a section that deserves some review, so shall we move on? Deserves more.
I just want to add a suggestion in here, but maybe I can write that in. But basically, it's just the inclusion of looking at very carefully anything that's on the potential historic resource level, even though it didn't make the list. But just recognizing the potential list as being part of this preamble of consideration, whether it's carefully considered or something.
Right.
I'll make that more like a red line.
Right, and we're going to be coming back to you with annual revisions to the potential list, so we get it cleaned up and get it to be as accurate as possible. And also, one other thing, when I do look at a potential site project that's in the demolition review study area, I also look at things like the stone walls. I've stopped projects because of the stone walls. Maybe the building wasn't significant, but the stone wall they wanted to remove was. And I do look at landscaping for skyline trees and potential historic.
Excellent.
So we do cover that. Accidents and mistakes will happen. We review a lot of projects, over a short period of time, but we do our best to catch everything.
Thank you. So we are done with section 3. There is a note of concern. We will revisit.
No, I think there's a couple more areas.
Okay.
And maybe it's just a matter of the wordsmithing or I just want to bring to the board's attention that one of the hardest things to design in any house, especially in single-family residences, but commercial as well, is the front porch. It is a very expensive per square foot. It's probably more expensive than the kitchen. It's a very, very difficult thing, very delicate. It requires, that's how you can tell a postmodern structure from a traditional structure. Most likely it's in the porch. Usually, the design of the capitals, the corbels, the ceiling of the porch, that. So, and because traditionally it's not considered an expensive item, that's why it ends up in this category of a minor addition. It is true. People may consider it a minor addition, but design-wise, a front porch is huge. It's what really... It's probably the most important part of the house. So that's why I'm having a little bit of a thought about that. So why
Mr.
is it?
Peugeot, I would have no problem with you, saying porches could not be approved administratively, if that you feel strongly.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage people to build porches and all that. On the other hand, I feel concerned that they may not be done with the attention that they require. That's one area that I would like, maybe input from the group. Another area is the area of trash enclosures. It is also the second area is extremely difficult to design a trash enclosure. That's why when you go to a planning commission, you see that usually it's a half-an-hour discussion about the trash enclosure, where it is, how it,
I also want to have the commission be aware that we have some administrative review standards that were inserted at the beginning. These are new, and they speak to design, material style, and how additions and alterations should proceed. And we speaking of helping applicants, we also believe that if a qualified architect comes in and presents a well-designed project, that it also serves to have them propose something that they believe is compatible and have an ability to confirm that. So it does give your colleagues an ability to propose a well-designed porch and have us concur that they've dealt with the compatibility issue and followed them. And in some cases, they're more qualified than us as the reviewer to make that judgment. So it's a give and take. The more you take away from staff, the less you give an architect the ability to come to the city and get a quick approval. So we rely on those architects also.
I just want to say one thing is that we've had porch proposals that we've rejected because they're not, as you say, the detailing is wrong, and the detailing on the porch is very important. And so, based on what I've seen this commission do and architectural references that I have at my office, we are capable of, in-house recognizing, when it's a good design versus a bad design, and helping people get to the appropriate pitch on the pyramidal columns for a craftsman and the rafter tails and that type of thing. And we've had a lot of success with it. And it would be a matter of if it was a really either a poorly designed porch that they refuse to, go into redesign on, or if it's significant enough that it's, so important in the streetscape, that would come to you automatically. We don't approve every porch that comes in.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, maybe one of the things that would help is to have documentation. Like, for instance, I remember a few years ago, we had a list of approvable colors in EPB, and there was something like such a way to. I mean, I'm trying to help. Not trying to provide more barriers, but a way to have. Well, a house of this style could use corbels of this style, and some kind of ways to help the public. Maybe they say this is skilled carpenter, but really it's not that knowledgeable about a certain architectural style. And,
Mr. Peugeot, yeah. Oh, what do you want to comment on?
As a matter of fact, we're working on that. In conjunction with Harrison Design, we're creating a design guideline that's going to reference each of the different architectural styles that are available throughout the city, and really emphasizing some of the other styles that are covered under EPV, like the Victorian era, Craftsman era buildings that we have. And we're going to put together these guidelines. That's going to be a written guideline that's going to do exactly what you're talking about, telling you exactly what type of rafter tail goes with what type of building, detailing the difference between an East Lake and a stick style Second Empire. And we're also going to have a training video. We went 2 days last week and shot 20 buildings for a training video that's going to be available for new HLC members, staff, and the public at large, and hopefully airing 5-minute segments on a monthly basis on Channel 18, which would highlight a different architectural style each month. And I believe that that'll do exactly what Mr. Peugeot is asking for, and it's quite far along in the process, and you'll be seeing some of the work soon.
Thanks.
I really appreciate your passion and enthusiasm for it. It's like it's really inspiring. As far as guidelines for specific styles, aren't there scores and scores of books out there that already, I mean, can't we just go to Borders and buy a Craftsman book and there's your guideline? I mean, why are we spending time on that?
You can do that, but people tend to identify more with it if we use local examples, which is what we're doing. Some things that they've seen in the community ring a bell more with the average individual than something coming out like we use the McAllister book for architectural details, and that's pretty much the standard across the country. That book was written in Chicago, and it's more geared towards the East Coast. We're going to be actually providing guidelines which use specific examples found within this city, and I think that'll just help people to identify with it more.
Mr. Schellenberger, also, you have to understand the context of why we're doing this. We have a plan to do historic districting throughout the city, and as we find historic districts, there are noticeable architectural styles that are prevalent in those districts, and we feel it's important to introduce those styles into our documents. So I think it'll be customized to each district. So we think it's going to pay off in the future.
Two other areas that maybe draw your attention. On page 18, we have garages, and it has a very nice comment that the garage should not be closer to the street than the house. I think that's very well put.
Page 18.
Page 18.
What item?
Page 18.
K?
What is it?
Item K?
Yes, item K, garage. I think that's good. I kind of wonder sometimes, not just not be closer than the house, but it seems like garage is facing the street where the car parks in front on the driver right with the butt showing towards the sidewalk. Those, I know we try to discourage those, and have you talked about that? I mean, not only not facing the street altogether. Right? Is that too?
Mr. Peugeot, it's actually a guideline in our neighborhood preservation ordinance, a single-family residential design guideline, so we can mimic that same language and insert it in here. That we're not to approve that type of arrangement.
At least not over the counter. And
Right.
just give it a little bit more thought. Maybe there's no other solution. It has to be like that. But it should not be encouraged in a way.
And we can also add some language in there. Basically, when we see these, it's usually somebody reconstructing a garage. And because they're usually in the older neighborhoods where they're on lots where the garage was maybe too close to the, wouldn't meet current zoning standards, if they rebuild it in the footprint and do it with the like materials and whatnot, then they can reconstruct the garage. So that's basically mostly what we're talking about here.
I see.
If it were something that were, a two-story carriage house design in back of a prominent building, of course that would come to the HLC. We would not over the counter. And also keep in mind when you say over the counter, that sounds like they're staying with the counter. I sometimes do multiple site visits, go out and meet architects, stew on it a while, go out to the archives. It's not over the counter is kind of a deceiving. Somebody doesn't throw it on the counter, I stamp it. I do give it the time that it needs.
I have absolutely no qualms about the way things are being done now. I'm just kind of worried if things change.
Just as the sign committee no longer
like there's no sign committee, right? Like we always rely on the sign committee. There is no sign committee.
Yeah.
What if there is no historian?
Maybe it comes in the job description needs to be tightened up to be. I'm a little bit different from the other historians. You had prior to me, you had people that could tell you what type of dog De La Guerra had. I don't know what type of dog he had. I don't care, but I can tell you how he built his doghouse, and so it's more useful to you than to story like the.
Well, it goes.
Perhaps at some point we need to tighten up the language as to what the requirements for the job are.
Mr. Peugeot, I trust me, if I lose the historian, I will have a lot of issues and voice those concerns at how our guidelines would have to be changed in order to address those concerns. So that if you're concerned specifically that position, often people are also concerned about experienced staff also changing over and turning over. But we tend to have those decisions gravitate toward more experienced staff as a policy. So I want to assure you that not all staff are currently allowed to do administrative removals.
Are there any other concerns regarding this section 3? Mr. Schallenberg?
Let's see. Let me come back to it.
Okay, then we will skip from section 3.
Are we still on section 3? Can I
Yes.
comment about manufactured homes?
Okay.
First, I would like a definition of a manufactured home. Obviously, a trailer could be considered a manufactured home, but are these? There's sort of two kinds of manufactured homes. They're the kind that come with all the parts and they get put together and then there are ones that you can haul in and on a couple of trailers. What are you talking about? What is a manufactured home?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
The state of California limits our ability to conduct design review on pre-manufactured homes.
Right.
Essentially, they are allowed. They're either modular or pre-manufactured, and they have the right to come into the city and be placed on a foundation. So they're not trailers. The problem that we see is sometimes they're not as refined as we'd like to see them. So there is an ability to improve the appearance to some degree. And that's where our focus would be on. And I think this implies that there's a limited scope of review that we are entitled to do. And that, this could be one area, again, that if this commission wants to focus on those type of installations, we could certainly take it off the list and say those type of installations, it would come to the commission. But we would also be limiting your purview to the degree that you could not change you could not make many changes to those designs.
Thank you. Yes.
One had circled, I think it would be something that I would like to discuss. Maybe this has to be something saying that the details of the house have to match the style of the house. Like if it's a plaster house, if you have a recessed window or whatever. So because it doesn't here, it talks about the siding, it doesn't talk about the windows. And so maybe we need to really put some more, define what the qualities of these manufactured houses need to meet, some kind of a standard. Then I would be happy with that, because it really is the same thing whether it's manufactured on site or not, but we don't have enough specs on this, I think.
Interestingly enough, a lot of the small bungalows that exist out there are manufactured homes because they were made by a company called Pacific Ready Cut. I've identified about 30, I think I have 30 or 32 houses on a list. I've been keeping track of where they are because I've got some of the old catalogs. And the catalogs were so accurate that if you stand in front of the house with the picture in the catalog, I mean, even the rafter tails are identical. It's amazing. But, of course, that was a different quality of material at the time. And unfortunately, we don't have that quality today. But there are manufactured homes and manufactured homes, and some of them are quite nice and some are not. So maybe we could get some sort of standard in there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Earlier, I think both Jake and Jaime both mentioned when a project comes in for administrative approval, potentially that there would be, that you recognize a qualified architect or designer as somebody you essentially trust. I think was kind of the gist there, and I wonder if that shouldn't be one of the elements here, is that there is a licensed architect, or I don't know, I know you don't have to be to do residential specifically, but that might be a standard that needs to be met in order to qualify for administrative approval, is that the applicant has hired a licensed architect. Although I know there are some good building designers that would probably take exception to that, but go get your license. So I don't know. I don't know how the commission feels about that.
I think that would be, like you said, there are a lot of designers out there. There's some very good designers out there. There's some very bad architects. So
Right. I think we got a
it's
problem.
an uneven scale. So I understand what your thought is that if it's a qualified professional that it's more likely they're going to get it right. But I don't think we can.
Can't sort them
I don't
out
think we can sort them.
arbitrarily
But I do
that way.
understand your.
It's just that qualified is not defined, or not. I mean, it's arbitrary to a personal opinion, or so to speak, at this point, and that's not an objective way to get there.
Understood.
Are there any other comments regarding Section 3? If none, I'll jump to zoning modification comments, Section 5. Any comments or questions?
Oh, wait a minute, excuse me. Maybe it's somewhere else, but you've got skylights, but you don't have the electrical solar panels?
Mr. DeForest, I think you're going to have to refer to an actual section, because you mean page 20 within Section 3?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think Mr. DeForest is alluding to the fact that currently there are limitations on design review for solar voltaic systems, and consequently we've taken the practice of doing these reviews administratively over the counter for a quick check. It's a screening check. Technically, they're not subject to design review unless we believe they are impacting a historic resource or they're located in a sensitive environmental location. So the majority of photovoltaic systems come to currently to the counter and get approved and signed off through a zoning check. They're not subject to design review.
But why aren't then they included in the...
Because we consider them ministerial and not a actual design review action. There's no trigger in our ordinance that says photovoltaic systems are subject to review. There are overriding special design district triggers like within EPV, any exterior change that we can trigger review if it's on a historic resource. There are limits as to when. So consequently, we're less likely to actually administratively approve anything and say it's subject to design review. It's merely a zoning clearance.
I'll move on to zoning modification comments.
Madam Chair, just one more quick thing on solar.
Yes?
When they do come in, we do work with the applicant. If we can see a better solution than, just sticking it right on the front of the building, we do work with them. And sometimes we're able to resolve the problem, to everybody's satisfaction. Sometimes we're not. But unfortunately, like Jaime said, they are ministerial and our hands are a little bit tied. But a lot of times the applicants are willing to work with us if we can come up with a suggestion for a better place to place them.
Thank you. Move on to landscape design part 2. All of this was added. Are there any comments about this section?
Yeah, I wanted to just say that this is a good section. I so appreciate it being in here, but I haven't had the time to really review this, so maybe I could. And here's a question: is the we recently, adjusted some ordinance regarding setback trees and street trees. Is that language, incorporated, that latest language, I guess, incorporated into this document?
Yes and no. What we've done is actually place some information on maintenance conditions of approval, where this commission can mandate that specific design landscape elements be maintained, and that's an element of our recent ordinance amendments. But we have not specified the ordinances in great detail in these guidelines. We believe our ordinances stand by themselves. So I would encourage you to go through the document and see if we could have some references to those if you feel they're appropriate.
Yeah, there could be some minor language things. And then I noticed that, toward the end of this section, where did I see it? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at some appendix, some lists that you attached, and that I just, maybe I should wait for my comment, but it's actually pretty brief. But in some of these, like the high fire landscape guidelines, there could be a historic property with a historic pine or eucalyptus that may not be acceptable, that should be somehow sensitively dealt with, whether pruned or whatever. There are some special considerations, I think, that I don't think, a list like this should be blanket. And then the other thing is there's an invasive plant species list. And this comes from the state, but if you look at a couple species like the olive tree is like a very, very important tree to use in our guidelines. So anyway, it's listed as a limited invasive species, but in and around the properties in Santa Barbara, it should be used and not overly used, but it shouldn't be thrown out because it's on this list. And I also find here's a special alert is on the Mexican and Washington, the Washingtonia fan palms, and those are very useful in terms of a tree that's significantly Santa Barbara. So anyway, I'm just saying that even though they end up on this list, there are a couple exceptions where we like them to be used and are very acceptable in our landscape guidelines. So what's the way to look at these appendix versus the guidelines that we're offering for applicants?
I guess what we could do is put some footnotes that alerts that there could be some type of decision that the HLC would allow them under certain cases.
Right, some flexibility or use. So
I'll look at that section and review that change with you. There's
three very, very important trees on the plant list, and that's the olive, it's the Mexican fan palm, and it's the California pepper. Those are significantly say something about Santa
Well,
Barbara.
we
but
could
I'm just
actually,
alerting you
we
to
could flag those
three.
actually, somewhat.
But I did think this is a great list,
Okay.
and it does give some guidelines about invasive grasses and things like this. I really think it's excellent to include this.
Mr. Adams, if you're not part of this review subcommittee, I don't know if we're going to select members I know Mr. Peugeot has expressed interest. I would certainly want to have a certain time frame where you could, submit your comments, because I would like to come back hopefully either in 2 weeks or 4 weeks to have these recommended for approval.
Okay. Thanks. That's
Yes.
my point.
On that note, I think we all should provide a red mark copy. I think we did that with Heather Baker a year ago with,
The guidelines.
yeah, and I think we all should be doing that.
Well, then, shall I assume that the commission would like to adjourn this discussion part, return with red lines and comments to the staff, and also, would you like us to start a subcommittee now or wait till the red lines go to you?
We could,
Appoint individuals, unless you want the full commission here.
I think the
We
full.
only need 1 or 2 individuals, I think, to work properly. If more want to participate.
Then I would say that Mr. Peugeot has already volunteered. Mr. Adams, are you willing, or shall we?
Yeah, I think I should, since I worked on that earlier iteration. Just it's mainly there, and the landscape section is great, but there could be some minor improvements.
What we can do is get everybody, encourage everybody to submit a markup copy.
Yes,
then
and I would
the
like it
first meeting
digitally,
we go-
actually.
pardon me?
I would like it digitally.
Okay, we can do
Thank
that.
you.
We can send that to you digitally.
And this question is for staff or Madam Chair. If we do a red line copy, where do we send it? What's the appropriate way to communicate that back to staff?
I'll have Susan send it electronically, and she could be the keeper of the versions, and then we'll share those red marks with the full committee that is working on them.
Thank you.
That's assuming that everybody is comfortable with making the corrections in the electronic version.
I
and
don't think
emailing
Louise
it
will
back.
be.
Pardon me?
I don't think Louise will be.
Either one.
Yeah.
Either one.
Okay, yeah,
Either or is
I like to
acceptable.
keep it
Hard copy
digitally.
or electronic.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's good if people emphasize what areas need to be worked on, because one thing is wordsmithing, and the other thing is, well, these areas need to be specifically, I find 5 or 6 areas, and that's all I have, really, even though I've spoken a lot today. I think there's some areas that need to be worked on, and I think you've done a great job. I think the direction of this is very good. Yeah.
So do you guys not want to just mark up the copies you have and bring those?
My handwriting is so terrible. I have to do
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah, it's a service to you.
that's
believe me.
And as long as we get them back to you at the counter or at a future meeting, then you can compile them. Okay.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Drury.
Page 49,
Oh,
item 5. Under item 5A, is it salutation or salination?
salination.
Will result in no significant increase in salutation. I didn't know if that was Commissioner Adams could educate me on a new landscape term.
I think we should be wordsmithing at this level.
It's siltation. Siltation.
Yeah.
Siltation.
Siltation.
That's
Okay,
spell
and
check.
I do have a question for staff, and in here I noticed that the forget what section it was, item E, it was reconsideration. It's all crossed out. So what's the intention? To take away that ability, or what? I mean,
I mentioned in my introductory comments that it'll be severely restricted based on city attorney direction. And so you'll be seeing some revised language that I will share
2 or
with you
3
as soon as I get
days,
it.
et cetera, et cetera. Yes.
you know, after being involved in a reconsideration, that's an excellent thing, is to restrict that. So that item needs help. Okay, thank you.
Something short, Mr.
Yeah,
DeForest.
very short. In page 45, item D, should, per Mr. Drury's, I think, somebody over there, said the idea, possibly there should be in-progress reviews between the concept review and project design approval. Isn't that what you?
Well, I think the other comment made by Mr. Schallenberger was that many projects do not need that. I don't think
No,
you should.
but the opportunity is there.
Yes, there's always the opportunity. It's always
But it
in the
isn't.
opportunity.
In progress always came after preliminary approval, if they needed it. And it wasn't,
Right.
yeah,
This
it
is not
wasn't
a-
always used. I mean, it was very few projects would come back for in progress. It was usually really large projects, but it's always been there. But it always came after prelim. It was concept review, preliminary review,
Yeah.
or approval,
But now,
in progress, and then
now
final.
that preliminary approval has gotten so important, shouldn't there be some process, I know it's there, that the, in other words, do you have to turn down the concept, or maybe we need a definition of what concept is, turn down the concept, reject the concept and have them come back with another concept? I mean, what goes before the project?
There's no concept vote. Concept.
There are comments only.
Only comments.
There is no
There's never
formal
a vote. There's never like a finish line on the comments. It's just the start of this process, from what I know.
In progress review should follow that. I'll put that in.
Well, with the
But
concept, we
I
basically,
like the benchmark idea. So maybe it could be stated better. Project design approval. Maybe that could say preliminary project design approval.
Shall we
or-
make these into red lines and then move
Yeah.
to subcommittee, and then we'll do that? This is yet
Yes.
another topic which can go
Let's do that.
quite a while. And so I think I'd like a motion for us to adjourn, and thank you, Mr. Dimon, for all the work this represents.
I just want to say that the work done here is going to make it easier for us, and it's very much appreciated, I think, by all of us on the commission. Thank you.
With that comment, I would make a motion for that. If we need a motion,
Adjournment?
we don't need a motion for this,
No.
right? No.
I just
so-
like to make it up.
So,
Thank
okay, I
you.
made a motion to adjourn. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
I'll second
Thank
that.
you. We needed all this time.